Mr. Baruch is a professional geologist with almost 20 years in both petroleum and geothermal experience and achievement. He is a proven key contributor to successful integrated multidisciplinary projects from exploration to development stages, leading and executing exploration surveys, drilling program, and various studies to provide technical solution and increase production. Mr. Baruch started his career as a geologist in several surface oil companies. He worked as geologist at Schlumberger from 2003 until 2007, then as a geologist at Chevron from 2007 until 2013, then worked at ConocoPhillips as geologist from 2013 until 2017. He also worked for 5 years as my boss as Chief Exploration Geologist at Supreme Energy from 2017 to 2022. During his work at Supreme Energy, he was responsible for all exploration-related activities from geology, geochemistry, and geophysical surveys to exploration drilling planning and execution, and also responsible in field data gathering and interpretation of new prospect areas in Indonesia. So to all participants, this is a unique opportunity to learn more about well logging, especially its application in the geothermal industry, directly from our expert, which is also very related to several courses that we being taught in our campus. So we will have around 30 to 40 minutes of presentation from Mr. Marino. And after that, we will have a question and answer session for 20 to 30 minutes. You can also put your question in the chat box, and we will have a discussion during the Q&A session. So without spending too much time again, I would ask Mr. Marino Baruch to begin his presentation. So stage and time is yours, Mr. Marino.
Well, thank you very much, Irfan, and students from the RWTH Aachen University student SPE student chapter for the opportunity for me to share my experience as well as my knowledge in wireline logging analysis in geothermal. And thank you very much, Irfan, as well for reading my CV. So I can skip one slide. Yes, today it's basically as requested to share my knowledge in well logging analysis, especially in geothermal fields, and in my experience, it's related to the high temperature, high terrain, related to volcanic arc or volcanic arc island in Indonesia. So this will be like kind of like a sharing, and feel free to the way I understand based on my career handling logs and drillings, and both in oil and gas and in geothermal, and then what has been done in the companies that I've worked. So I'm just trying to share, and maybe it's different companies will have different formation evaluation program, but I think this is like what we've been using in geothermal so far. So I'll start with the introductions. The introductions will cover mostly about what's the geothermals, and the brief of the elements of the geothermal system, what kind of subsurface data that are needed to do a reservoir characterization in geothermal, and how do we get that data by doing the formation evaluation program, and then in particular what type of logging tools that are run in geothermal. And I'll show you an example of some of the logging analysis, and then I'll wrap it up with the challenges in running the wireline logs in geothermals. Okay, so I think this is a good slide to start. If you see the figure on the left, basically, is a volcano. So this is kind of like a typical conceptual model of a volcanic arc geothermal system, where you can see that it's related closely to a volcano. And then we have the upwelling of the geothermal fluids near to the core of the volcano. And as it ascends upward, this acid fluid being neutralized by the rock-water interactions, and then outflowing at a certain level, and then manifests in so-called neutral chloride springs that indicate that this is the reservoir fluids. As the hot fluid ascends, it starts to boil, generating steams, and then the steams interacted with the geothermal, with the groundwater, and then generating some acid sulfate pools or springs, as well as the steams leaking out, generating fumaroles on steaming ground, and then some bicarbonate springs. And the effect of the rock-water interaction generating an alteration zones, where you can see that as the temperature drops, the alteration assemblage changes, and usually at the top of the geothermal system will have smectite or clay-rich from alteration zones that will cap the system. And so we do have this conceptual model, and in geothermal, like in oil and gas, the way we try to produce or try to utilize is by utilizing our drilling wells. So we drill the wells into the reservoir, and then try to produce the water, and then use the water into, and then generate the steam, use the steam into the as a power, as electricity. And then we will and then the brine is being reinjected into the system. So and then hopefully it will go back to the reservoir, and then so we'll have a so-called renewable system over here. So in short, geothermal is basically we are mining the heat from the earth that is being transferred through a circulating fluid. So we'll have a convective cells, and then either we, I think, you know, what the one that I show right now is basically a natural convection cells, but also in geothermal there are a system that if we have a hot rocks or hot formations, then we can utilize by injecting fluids. So that's called engineered. And then try to, so we drill a well, we inject the fluids, and the fluids will sweep the heat, and then will be produced from another well. So it's kind of like that. So what elements compose the geothermal system? So what's the key elements that we need as a geothermal system? So of course we need a heat source. So we need a heat. Because to heat it, and then it will conductively heating the areas, the rocks, and then in the reservoir, we need to have enough permeable or porosity that allows the water to circulate and freely, so we can and then usually in geothermal we have these fracture formations. And we need the impermeable cap rocks in order to hold the system so it's not leaking out. And in most geothermal, you have leaks in the form of the thermal manifestation, as I showed before in the previous slide, as fumaroles or hot springs. So these are the key elements, and these are the one that we need to characterize in subsurface. And how do we characterize that? Since it is by collecting informations not only from surface surveys such as geophysical surveys or geological mapping, but once we drill the well, then we need to acquire more data, and the only way we can acquire the data is through the well, and one of them is doing the well logging. Okay, I'll give you a brief about the well design. So in this is applicable also usually in oil and gas as well. There are two types in general. So we have vertical well And then we have deviated well, meaning deviated. So we have is deviated. So we build an angle. Why do we do this? Usually because if we are limited in well pads, because in geothermal you are building in rough terrain, high terrain, very high slopes, so you don't have enough flat space, narrow spaces, so you need to utilize the available space and then try to capture the reservoir or the tap in the reservoir from that, and then try to direct your well. So this is a standard slanted well, or J type. Sometimes they have the S type, where you build and then you drop. This is, or sometimes this is not really common in geothermal, but maybe in the enhanced geothermal system where you want to drill a particular layers of formation that, and then you wanna inject the fluid there and then be produced from other. So in order for you to get more lateral or more distance in the formations. Key points over here that in all drilling wells that you have to have a depth reference. Usually the drillers will have the depth reference at what they so-called rotary kelly bushing or rotary table elevations. It's like at the floor of the rig floor, and that's above. And then you have your ground level. And then there are two type of depth, usually the so-called the measure depths or the measure depths. And also there's a true vertical depths. So in the vertical wells, your measure depths usually equivalent to your true vertical depths, but in your deviated wells, it might be is different. So this is a typical wells that are done. And there's another one, this 3D wells, basically. So it's basically the same. It's just you have built and then you direct the well and then you change the directions. This really depends on the objective of the well. And by showing you this, it'll give you an idea of some difficulties of doing the logging. It's because wireline is basically after you complete the well, you will run a log, a tool through using a wireline, and then you try to get informations from the reservoir, as is going to be shown here after. So basically, if you see this, the way we drill the well is that you start with a bigger hole size. This is called the surface hole size, and then you put a casing. And this is a surface casing usually. So sorry, starting with a conductor. I would say that there's several type of holes. So this one, you can have the conductor as big as 36 inch with a 30-inch conductor, and then you will drill the surface section. Usually can be in the big hole is around 26 inch, and then you put your casing around 20-inch casing, and then you drill a smaller hole size, basically. Usually it can be 17.5 or 12.25. It's depend on your hole type. And then you put your cemented casing. and this is very tricky over here, because this is where the geologists in geothermal, they need to pay attention at the top, the depth of this less cemented casing. So we call it a PCS depth, or a production casing depth. Why? Because it need to be set close to the top of the reservoir. We don't want to drill into the reservoir because it's a fracture reservoir. One of the challenges is when you drill a fracture reservoir, you will the fracture is permeable enough that you will start losing circulations. And then when you start losing circulations, it's kind of difficult to cement this casing, because this casing is cemented. So in exploration drilling, this is a challenge, because we are heavily rely on the geophysics data to help us setting this depth. And usually, as you see in their par, there is an alteration zones, usually where you have an unaltered or wilky altered rocks, the surface. And as you start drilling, you start having this clay cap, which consists of a smectite ridge and called the argillic zones. And near the reservoir, you start changing the from smectite into smectite illite or mixed layer clay, and you start seeing the high temperature minerals, what we so easily call the epidote, and then in the reservoir is basically a high temperature illite rich or propylitic zones. So we will set our last cemented casing here, and these are on the left is kind of what's the interpreted temperature. So our reservoir usually in the high enthalpy or high temperature system is from above 240 degrees C. That would be 460 F. And then we drill usually we can drill 2 sections or 1 section in the reservoirs, depend. We will try to go as deep as we can, because we want to get a more coverage in the reservoir, and then we can split it and then run what this is a perforated liner. The function is to avoid the hole collapse, so we put a liner and then we drill a smaller hole and then put another smaller perforated liner. And what are the key informations that we need? So we'll need a lithology, alterations, where the top of reservoir, and then the permeability, temperature, and pressure. So those are the informations that we need in order to characterize our reservoir, and then and based on that, we design our formation evaluation program in order to obtain this key information. So this is just to give you an example of the formation evaluation program. So the left figure is the hole size and the casing design. So usually when we do drilling prognosis, so this is one of the informations are required, that where we want to put our casing, what's the hole size, what's the casing size, and then how many hole sizes that we are going to use, what's the depth. So this is the depth of the total depth of the sections, and then expected lithology based on the prognosis, and then usually we'll start with cutting data in the surface up to the top of the reservoir, because we'll have the cutting, and then we'll do the cutting analysis at site. And as we enter the reservoir, we may or may not have cutting because of these lost circulation. So, and then there where we run the logging, and we have core samples in several depths. We can also use the mechanical sidewall core as well to do this, because if in a good well, a good permeability well, we'll most likely will have lost circulation, and if we don't acquire any data, then we don't have any informations aside from the usual pressure and temperature data. So just to give you an idea, the examples of formation evaluation. So this figures is showing you cuttings under microscopes, and in this figures you can see that this is a pale green or yellowish green is the in mineral indicators that the geologist, well-set geologist, is trying to see. This is an epidote. So if we found this during the drilling, then this is a good indication that we are close to our reservoir. But we need to understand whether this is how to describe this. Is this a fresh one, or is this pale, or is this a real relic? So just a good. You need to have a good understanding of. And then is it spotted or is continuously? The low figure is basically a core flux. This is the size of a core flux, usually 1 inch or like 2.5 centimeters. And the middle figures here is an example of image log interpretations, where you have image logs, and then you have your fractures being taken manually, and these are like the statistic of the fractures. And the common logs or the usual logs that we acquire in geothermal is the pressure and temperature logs. So these are the series of temperature logs and also the pressure logs that will give you an information about the pressure and the temperature, as well as the permeability indications. And usually it will come in series because the well will heat up after drilling, and then you'll run several surveys until you can find a stabilized pressure and temperature. So now we'll move to type of logging tools, and the way I try to categorize is the log type, and the categories here is OH is open hole. So if you go back, usually when we run the wireline log, there are some logs that we'll run it open hole, so no casing or no perforated liner. And there are some logs that we can run with casing after we run the casing. So basically for gamma ray, you can run it in open hole or case hole. And the application is for lithological interpretation, usually with high potassium or silicic formations. Image log, usually we run it open hole because we need to have the pads attached to the borehole wall. That's for fracture interpretation, lithology, texture interpretation, geomechanics analysis, permeability indication by looking at the fractures. Then we have the sonic, both and compressional and shear. Usually it's an open hole. We'll do it for geomechanics, velocity model. We can combine and with the image log for fracture interpretation, because sonic has more depth of investigation compared to image log. So we can kind of try to filter out which fractures are kind of more open, at least away, like maybe 1 or 2 meters away from the wellbore. A density log is for geomechanics and petrophysical analysis. It will give you porosity. Also good for calibration for the gravity data. And then we have the standard pressure and temperature. We can run it case hole or open hole, but usually we'll run it, since the tool is too small, and it's better and prone to, if you put a high injection rate, and if you run it in open hole, then if you lose it, we'll lose it, and then we'll have problems because we cannot set we need to fish it first and then run the casing. So usually we will run it after we set the perforated liner. And the application is for the reservoir pressure and liquid level, and for the temperature is the temperature and permeability indications. There's another standard tools called spinner or production logging, and that's for permeability. And then for the drillers, they usually, after they run the cement casing, they will run the cement bound log, is to capture the cement integrity. In particular, if I come back, so the problem, if you have to set the cemented casing after you have a lost circulation, then there is a chance that you will not have a good cement in the annulus, and thus that you need to ensure by running the cement bound log to say you have the cement proper cement integrity at the back of your casing. Okay, so let me check time-wise. Okay, still have good time. So these are just an example. We can discuss later have more discussion. So the pressure temperature, what can it give you? So this is a typical, you could have depth, and then you have your pressure in bar on PSI. You can see that there's a pressure over here, the pressure line, and then there's another one that is shown blue here, and then suddenly the gradient change. And that gives you an interpretation that if you have a steam in your reservoir or you have a gas, and then this is where you have a steam liquid or your liquid level over here, and then you have your steam or gas. And here basically, in here you basically have a positive pressure, meaning that you have an artesian well. So this is maybe some overpressure. And here's you have soft hydrostatic maybe under pressure, and it's a typical geothermal reservoir. And then if you go into the right one is basically a temperature, and then you can run this both under shut-in condition, or you can do it while flowing. So you can have or while injection. So usually they will come, they'll run it continuously, and then and try to get the profiles. And like it says, we have a convective profile, so we have a conductive profiles. This gives you an idea of where you are in the reservoir, and you can have an outflow profile where you have a temperature, a high temperature, and then suddenly a reversal, or you can have an upflow. So you can and then you can combine that with, and then give you an idea if you can have a deflection in temperature, and showing that maybe there's an inflow to the wellbore. So this is a really key information, and that's why this is a standard. You will have to run this in any wells, in all of the wells, I guess, that is commonly we'll have this set of wells. This is a well logging, an interpretation marker unit using gamma ray, basically. So as I mentioned, that gamma ray can identify potassium, and then it's rich in silicic formation. So in this particular field, the dominant reservoir is andesitic, and it has a low gamma ray, and it has a marker unit, so-called a rhyodacite marker, and can easily be distinguished by the gamma ray that shows here that it starts picking up the gamma ray. And then below the rhyodacite marker, they have this lower andesite, and then the gamma ray decrease again. And as soon as they enter the mixed sediment, here the gamma ray start to increase. So with this kind of information, you can utilize this, because in the reservoir, start losing circulation, we don't have any cuttings, and it's kind of hard for us to interpret if we don't run any image log. So this is a cheaper way. Usually we can run the gamma ray with the PT logs, and then we can utilize. So in this particular, they were using it, and they were able to map this unit throughout the fields, and provide reservoir characterizations such as the faults interpretations and distributions of the lithology. This is another application of the well logs. So this is an image log interpretation, in particular fractures characterization. So I'll start with these figures here. The way we use image log is basically a resistivity based. It can also be an acoustic based, but in this particular paper written by myself and my colleagues, is that we use the image log, and then we try to, if you can see that this is a bright color indicating a high resistivity, and then we have this dark color or conductive colors indicating that it might be an open fractures or fractures filled with muds, or so indicating that we need to use other logs to confirm that. So we pick this manually. So in this case, the whole data, we have around 4,900 fractures out of how many wells? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 wells. So that's a lot of fractures. And then we characterize that, and then we try to understand the trend of the fractures as shown here, and try to understand if there is a consistent trend in these fractures, and try to correlate with the faults system in these particular fields. So we characterize it due to the types, trends. We focus on the open fractures, and then we try to see it. We have in this particular field, we have deep reservoir how does it look like, whether we have a different set of trends. I think here is more northwest southeast. Well, this reservoir here has more north-south. So this is important. And then how do we do it is by manually pick this and try to interpret the fractures, orientations, and also the dip. So in this case, we can see that it's mostly high angle fractures. And we also do the interpretation of the in situ stress orientation by looking at the borehole failures. For example, in this particular image, we see a tensile fractures, and then we try to pick that and give the orientations and see. And this will be useful when we do a geomechanics. So after we pick all these fractures and you see a 4900. And not all these fractures are contributing. So we filter it out again with the feed zones informations that coming from the injection test, the production test. And you can see now, if I go here, that let's say here, then this is a number of fractures like 460, 500. And then if you go and then you filter it out and it become less. So not all fractures are contributing in the permeable, contributing to the well, as you can see. But so we need to, so we cannot use only image log. So we need to combine the image log with PT data, PTS data, drilling losses informations, sonics, and such that we can better characterize our permeable zones. And if you see, this is a good how do I say that, representation. So what we're trying to show here is that this is an interval where they have the feed zones, and the size of the stereo net shows how big is the production. So what is trying to say over here is even though you have a small interval feed zone, you might have a big productions if you hit the big permeability or like fault zone. And for example, this is have a huge interval of feed zone, but very small, showing by this small, so it has a small production. So you don't have to have a long permeable zones. You can have one or two, you can hit a major structures, and then you can have a big permeability. And that's kind of sometimes in most of the faulted control geothermal system that you can see that that the permeability is focusing on a particular structures. So same thing, and so and then I think we did a more advanced analysis. So the same analysis was as this one. We apply geomechanics basically. So we utilize sonic log, density logs to generate the elastic properties, and also try to interpret the pore. We do have already the pressure data as a pore pressure, and then we generate the in situ stresses. And with that, we can do what we call a critically stressed fracture. So if you know the stress difference and then the stress orientations by a frictional equilibrium theory, then you know that some fractures with orientation respect to the maximum horizontal stress orientation will tend to be critically stressed because if you change the pore pressure and then it will shift the stresses, generating an imbalance, and these fractures are bound by their coefficient of internal frictions. So if it exceeds the coefficient of internal friction, it will generating the fracture to move. And since the fracture planes are not flat smooth, so you will tend to preserve permeability. And then when we filter out all the fractures including the effective fractures that I've shown before, we can see that in these right figures where you have the feed zones, and this is the number of fractures for one well, and you can see that these critically fractures that's shown here by the orange are correlating very well with the permeable zones, indicating that yes, this is showing a good correlation that maybe our feed zones are fractures that are critically stressed, and we can try to identify the orientation of this, and will be useful for future well targeting, basically. So this is kind of the last 3 slides that I shown you here is kind of how do we utilize the image log and the other logs for fracture interpretation. So we'll reach at the end of my presentation, and I'd like to close out with these challenges. So I think there are 3 or 4 challenges, especially in the high reservoir temperature. So most wireline tools have a temperature maximum for 180, around 350 degree, maybe less. And geothermal reservoir is more than 240. And when we have a good well, even though after we drill, and then it usually heat up quickly. So rarely we can, we will have limitation in try to get the full logging interval. So how to mitigate that? Usually we have to have enough water and do a continuous injection. We can run a high temperature tool, but the availability also limited. Or we can combine 1 or 2 logs in one run to minimize the logging time. Another way is also to do, another one is another loss circulation, which is common, but in a particular acoustic-based tool, this will affect the quality, especially above the liquid level, because the wave sound cannot travel in void space, so we will have a poor quality. In order to mitigate that, is maintain a liquid level. It might be a big challenge in a good permeability well, because all the fluid will tend to go out into the formation. So the third one, that's why I brought up the well type, is because as the higher the angle or near horizontal well, because the tool will tend to sit on the low side of the borehole, basically, and this condition will require will especially affect the log quality, especially tools that require to be in centralized. Yeah. Another thing is going to be a tough logging condition, so you will need coil tubing, or you need to add more weights. Either you put a single bar, or you put a combine 1 or 2 logs. Another thing is if you have a poor hole conditions, meaning that it's not gun barrel type of hole condition, so meaning that it's not slick, and then if you have hole ovalizations, or then you can tend to have tool to go unable to go down or to go up and get stuck. So you need to ensure a good hole cleaning prior running this wireline logging. So I think that's all I can share. Thank you very much again for the opportunity. And I think we can open for discussion. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your really comprehensive presentation, Mr. Marino. So now we are open the discussion, the Q&A session. If you have any question, please raise your hand, and I will let you to open your mic, or maybe you can write down your question in the chat box, so I can also read your question from the chat box. So if you have any question, please raise your hand. Okay, so first question is from Ryan. You want to ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, Mr. Marino. So I would like to ask a question from the perspective of geology here. So let's see, is it possible, or is it a common case that we couldn't able to, like from the core, we couldn't able to see the smectic or elite core in there? And how do we kind of pinpoint about the position of the the position for the top reservoir itself? If we couldn't able to find found the in the core, there is no indicator of smectic or elite, or the green things that you said before. I think that's
Okay.
first question.
Okay. So your question, if let's say from the cutting we are unable to identify the informations
Yeah,
that
from the
can
cutting.
help us, that would be, so there are usually in my experience, if you want, there are several ways. First of all, you identify by looking at the mineral assemblage, right? You try to see the epidotes, and then another things we use is a methylene blue analysis. So we grind the cuttings, and then we try to dry the cutting and grind it, and then we put we drop a methylene blue, and then see because it will indicate how much smectite you have. And that also, so you have, if you are still seeing a high methylene blue counts, basically, then you're still in the argillic or the smectite rich layers. And if you see more the count dropping and then continually dropping, then you will see that you're already near the transition zones. That's one thing. Another thing, so you cannot only rely on the petrographic. Another thing, we also use the temperature, since there is the mud in and mud out temperature. That's also a good rule of thumb to see if you have a delta in your mud in and your mud out, and some delta, then you're already close to that. And another one is the MWD temperature. So we need 4 or 5 indicators, as well as the what you call it, the high temperature minerals such as epidote and such. Now, and we try to combine those data, and it's very tricky, especially if you only have one well. So you just need to, because the challenge, if you set it shallow enough, the problem is that if we have a colder reservoir, colder fluids, and that we don't want to get into the reservoir, right? But if we set it deep enough, then we already encounter lost circulations. Then we'll have a drilling problem. It will, you can manage it, but it will take some time. And then another thing is so another thing is that if you start looking at the partial losses, and that's where you wanna, so you have to combine not only one data, so it has to be several informations. I hope that answer your question.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the second question will be from Yusuf Akbaji. You can directly ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Marino, thanks for sharing from your wealth of experience with us. It was very clear from the presentation, and I really find it interesting. Although I've not worked in the oil and gas industry nor geothermal energy extraction industry, I have experience from groundwater drilling, so I could relate with a lot of what you have presented here today. And another thing is I've been given admission at Aachen since like November 2019. This is about 6 admissions now. But unfortunately, for visa reasons, I can't make it down there. That's just on the side. My question would be related to there was a brief discussion that was ongoing before the presentation started about this gradual shift from oil and gas to geothermal in Europe, right? And from some of the things you presented, you said that sometimes you have to inject fluid and all that during drilling. Are they not similar to, is this process not similar to hydrofracking in the oil and gas industry? By extension, are there also environmental concerns with drilling for geothermal energy similar to that of the oil and gas industry? And do we have cases like maybe groundwater pollution and all that in the process of trying to tap geothermal energy? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yusuf. I kind of lost you when you just want to when you're starting to ask your question, so I kind of lost the context of your question. Can you repeat it? Because this is a bad connection in my side. Apologize for that.
Okay, no problems. My question is, you mentioned about injection of fluid during drilling.
Yes.
For geothermal energy.
Yeah.
And to me, it's kind of reminiscent of what occurs in the oil and gas industry. That's as regards hydrofracking.
Yeah.
That's to maybe to induce or improve production and all that, right?
Oh.
So is this not, there are no similarities between drilling for geothermal energy and oil and gas? And then are there environmental concerns in drilling for geothermal energy similar to that of the oil and gas industry? Maybe something like groundwater contamination and all that in the process.
Okay. All right. So let me try to address your question. I think I understand. So basically, in geothermal, a typical reservoir in geothermal, especially where I work here, since it's fracture reservoir, so we have a good permeability, meaning that we do not have to frack it. And that's one thing. And so another thing is that above here, usually when we drill, we try to maintain a circulations. So as soon as we encounter a lost circulation, meaning the fluid is going to formation, the drillers will tend to have a mitigation on how to stop the lost circulations over here in order to avoid any contamination of the groundwater for sure, and then understanding what's the where's the aquifers and such. So and that's why also you also see that the way they case. We have several casing over here in order for us to mitigate. I think to mitigate that, so we can have several layers of this, and we try to. They'll try to avoid any leakage by having that. I think that's you know, drilling in geothermal is almost usually the same, but the difference is maybe in the oil and gas, in the reservoir, they're always going to have a cemented casing down to the bottom. But here, since we have fracture basement, then we can utilize because we can utilize only the perforated liner. So to answer your question, I think it is as much as possible in the shallow formation. They will try to avoid any leakage or and maintain in a good circulation. I hope it can answer your question.
Yes, very well. Thank you very much. I'm grateful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your question, Mr. Yusuf. So I will give the third question to my colleague Napoleon. Please ask your question.
Yes, Mr. Napoleon, please.
Hello, Mr. Napoleon, you can ask your question.
You're still in mute.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Marino, for the presentation, and thank you, Ivan, for this opportunity. I want to direct my question to one of the slides where you presented stereo plots for the fractures. Okay. Yeah.
This one?
No, where you had those stereo plots, you had 4,900 fractures that you analyzed. Yeah, this one, I think, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you tried to, you told us about the characterization, you characterized the fractures and then told us about the orientation.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned something like they were all high angle fractures.
Yeah.
So I wish to ask if, in case you have high angle or low angle fractures, which one poses a challenge, maybe technically during geothermal exploration? Why is it important that you mention the high angle or low angle? Yeah.
It's just one way of putting a statistic, and you see, we in this case we also have a low angle, but statistically the areas are having a high angle fractures. And naturally can have a high angle fractures, or maybe it's because of we have a well being deviated, so we intersect more high angle because of respect to the well. So but again, it doesn't imply that in some areas you might also have a low angle fractures, especially in areas where you have a thrust faulted system. So it's just trying one way to characterize your areas. So you put not only the orientations of the fractures, but what's the magnitudes of the dips, and that also can help you if you have a nearby structures, then and you map out that how does the fault angle is it. And for example, in the strike slip environment, you tend to have more higher angle. So that's one way of just trying to characterize it. Napoleon.
Yeah, I was asking that, for instance, if you have the same heat source and the same amount of fluid, maybe the same formation, but the fractures, in case where maybe in one side or one formation, the fractures are high angle and the others fractures are low angle. Do they have the same productivity, or does it matter? Does it differ? Yeah.
So let me show you here. It's a good example of, you see, from 4900, I guess this is down to maybe 100 or 200 max. And you can see by statistic, it's still showing you a high angle, but the trend is more similar, but it doesn't show you if you have a thick permeable zone, and then necessarily you will have a big permeable big production, right? So and that's why we need to try to understand. So it's complex. So if you back to your questions, it's really depend on the pressure and the pressure spinner, the spinner lock. So when you have to run your spinner lock, and then if let's say that your low angle fractures provide more permeability, then you need to understand why. Maybe you are in the lava where you have more sheeting joints, then tend to give you low angle fractures compared to maybe a dike or something like that. So this image log cannot stand alone. Basically, you need to have your pressure temperature, and then you combine both and try to understand. So the pressure temperature gives you your permeable zones, and then this can help you giving a geological context of what would be your permeable zones look like, if I can understand. So it may be different in different geological settings. So we cannot just say, oh, if I have a low angle fractures, then they'll tend to give better permeability, or the other way around.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's actually it's a really interesting question. So if I can add something, that maybe the angle of the fracture itself, it could be related to the how we design the weld itself.
Exactly.
Something, yeah. So in our case, sometimes we don't want to hit the fault in the area where we still have a lower temperature. So we want to have we want to hit the fault in the area where we have the higher temperature. So our productivity will become higher in that time. So if we, as Marino already mentioned too, if we got the permeability to shallow and then in the less temperature or low temperature, it will reduce our productivity of well itself. So we want to tap the fracture in the good temperature, in the high temperature. So this kind of analysis is very important to design the well also. Is that true, right,
Yeah.
Mr. Marino?
Yeah, that's correct.
So let's continue our discussion. If you still have any question, please raise your hand. We are open our discussion. So you can also put your question in the chat box, and I will read the question. So maybe I will have a question to hit up the discussion. Okay, so we are talking about the actually the volcanic environment, right?
Yes.
So in case in Germany area, especially in the North Rhine-Westphalia, the question the reservoir that they want to tap, it's like more like I mean, it's more carbonate. It's more carboniferous itself, the reservoir that they want to tap. So I know you have also experience in the such environment, right, from the oil and gas perspective. So how do we utilize this well log analysis in such environment, such as in the carboniferous sandstone or something like that?
Well, actually, these logs were run originally in the oil and gas, and then recent, and then were being adapted in geothermal. So I think it will be the same, I guess. If you have you will do, if it's fracturized carboniferous rocks, then you'll use the amateur log trying to understand the characteristics. You can also run other tools called the for secondary porosity. You can use the NMR tool as well. Try to understand if it's have a secondary porosity, it's like Bugs porosity or something like that. A gamma ray would be a good, and also a PEF, so you can pinpoint your carbonate section. And I guess you're talking about deep sedimentary basin, yeah. You're trying to tap in and then try to inject a water. Is it correct, Irfan?
Yeah, that's true. But the first target is also related to hydrothermal.
I see.
Not the unconventional using the hot dry rock, but it's more still the hydrothermal circulation that we try to find.
I see, but it's very deep, yeah. Or let's say what, 3,000 meters or 4,000?
That's true. That's true. It's very deep.
Yeah. So I guess another way is that I don't know if you use what would be the gradient, the geothermal gradient. Does it follow the normal geothermal gradient? I think so. Is it 3,000 meters? Yeah.
In Germany, yes. Yeah, we have it in Germany. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, you'll not find a challenge with temperature challenges. So you can run these tools. But I guess if you try to drill the horizontal wells, then you need to have a special tool to run the logging, basically. But it's the same standard tool. I mean, for that we can apply what I present over here to the ESO as well in Germany to characterize, for example. Yeah, this one. This is basically standard tool in oil and gas.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. So we have a question in the chat box from Mr. Francisco Porturas. The question is, what is the new hardware for geothermal, high temperature geothermal? And do you agree that all are being integrated with our environments? Google's, for example, NMR in geothermal?
Okay, let me new hardware for geothermal high temperature. So let me try to I guess there are some high temperature tools, especially the pressure and temperature, that can withstand a higher temperature. This typical high temperature tool, they are more like a sleeve type of tool, so they don't expose their cables. So what happens is that these cables are not are the one that get burned because of the high temperature. So that's why the image log, the resistivity base that have arms, they have limitations. You know, there is an image log high temperature image log with arm, but it's not common. It's limited in availability. So the acoustic base is more used and it's more common to be used because it's more sleeve type, and then you can rotate. The challenge with this acoustic is it has to be centralized. So if you have a deviated well, then you have to have a good centralizer in order to maintain the tool into the center. Because if not, then you'll have a blurry type of image if your tool is far away from the wellbore, and then you have a better image at the bottom of the site. So that's the challenge of this acoustic base. And then if you have a lost circulation, usually then you'll have a poor image quality. That's something. For the second one, I don't. What do you mean by interrated with? Can you explain about that?
I think that everybody trying to use what we use in oil and gas exploration to geothermal, which is a completely different environment.
Yes.
And there is no, let's say, verification tool for anything for high temperatures. I know very well the wells in Germany. It was 167 degrees, for example, in the Landau geothermal field.
Yeah.
And the wells were deviated only 25, 26 degrees for the injector or producer.
Yeah.
But you see, the thing is that everybody wants even to use the same pricing for oil and gas and extrapolate to geothermal. And then we have a problem because we can advance.
Yeah. I understand that. Yes. Maybe, yeah. So the question was about the how to say it in geothermal. This type of tool basically is in oil and gas is a kind of standard tool, and then the pricing is more competitive there. But the challenge in bringing these tools to geothermal fields per se is because of the mobilization to a higher terrain, and then it's kind of maybe on the isolated places, and that kind of increase the price. That's for and the pricing wise. And the second one is the temperature of the tool. But I guess in Germany, if the temperature is not an issue, so I guess it's just a matter of, I don't know how many activities for drilling activities in Germany, especially in the oil and in the geothermal. So the more wells you have, it can also benefits the pricing of the formation evaluations. I guess that's if to answer. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Mr. Polturas, do you have any further question? Yeah.
Yeah, you see, I worked a lot with borehole images, acoustics, and I know how difficult it is to introduce those new technologies 20 years ago. Yeah. But today, for example, if you look the perspective to 2050 and beyond, there you were going to have a lot of influence of this EGS type of wells.
Yes.
And this EGS type of wells is a challenge. You can't go on there and run an NMR, for example, in a granite.
No. I agree with you.
So you see, no. We need to try to think what is going to be the logging. Drilling, of course, we know that it's a big challenge. They need to find a new type of new way to drill. But we need also measurements, because without measurements, these millions of dollars are not going to be invested. And I know that ETS is the only way where you can drill and generate geothermal electricity or heat everywhere. You don't need to be by side of the volcano.
Yes, given that
crystalline, granitic crystallines in Brazil, everywhere, you can use it for heat. In the US, you see, they just voted $400 billion budget for this type of alternative energy, and 27 of them is going to be for geothermal. So you see, my curiosity is at the same time my enthusiasm, because I like logging, because without measurements, we can't do too much.
Yes.
And thinking what could be the tools for this type of future.
Oh, I think that's a good question, Mr. Francisco, because for example, ImageLog started in 1991 and still being used until now. So not much of new technologies, but yeah, it's becoming more common, to be honest. I mean, usually like back 15, 20 years ago, not many geothermal runs in ImageLog, but nowadays almost it's kind of standard for one new well in new pads to run the ImageLog, and it's tool is available. But to answer your question is in terms of new technology, I think it's best to address to the service company. But to my knowledge, as I mentioned, in terms of the challenges in acquiring the data, first of all is I think how can we utilize this set of data? I don't know in the back of what kind of type of data. I think we try to do the geomechanics analysis and combining that. I think that's also applicable for the enhanced geothermal system in order for you to place your wells such that you'll be able to frac and generate fractures for that. Another thing with the EGS also, you might also have a suitable temperature in order for you to get more heat. But to my knowledge, I haven't heard any new applications yet so far.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Mr. Marino.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe we still have one or two questions. Okay.
Sure, Fikri, go ahead first, I guess.
Okay, Fikri.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for the very insightful presentation, Mr. Marino. Yeah, I have a question regarding the conceptual model. Like you showed from the slides, the conceptual model from the region that have volcanics. Like for example, here in Germany, there is no much volcanic mountains. And how can we, as a geoscientist, create a conceptual model if the region has no association with volcanics? Thanks.
That's a good question, especially for me, considering I don't have no experience in the basin type geothermal system. So so it's going to be a learning curve to me too, in order to understand. But based on the publications, maybe I can share. But you guys, or maybe the audience, know better than I do. That it's more related if you have an aquifer deep enough that you can tap in the water, and then you can utilize the heat per se, that or say like 100. I mean, more than like 100, more than 120, or less than 180, because if you have a temperature of higher than 180, then you will find difficulties finding the pump that can withstand the temperature. And so with that, And then, I don't know whether you can have hot springs as an indication. So meaning that the water leak out to the surface, given that the reservoir is around 3,000 meters or 4,000 meters deep. So maybe I guess if it outcrops somewhere along far away, and then you can and then it leaks out some hot springs, and you can map it out. But I think that's as, or maybe if the formation hit a structures, and then you see the manifestations in the surface. But other than that, I'm sorry that I cannot help you much. So if there are any other audience here that have an experience, maybe you can share on how to identify these features in more like basin type system.
May I chip in? Maybe Nikas or someone from Germany here can also add some things here. But I had an opportunity to get some kind of like a field course in related to how German people do some exploration related to geothermal here. Yeah, this is correct that the target is always a carbonate actually, and one of the things that they always kind of like highlight about the how the condition in the subsurface is that they see that there are a lot of fractures in the outcrops of the carbonate itself. So my question is, how crucial actually for the outcrops fractures in the outcrop actually in the surface, and how do we relate it into the subsurface? Does it kind of like crucial or enough for geothermal production and stuff in the subsurface, which will be kind of 3,000 or 1,000?
So I think an outcrop is good for analogizing your reservoir. So if you have a reservoir outcropping, then you can look at it, you can touch it, right? So it's good. So you can understand what the fracture types looks like. Then you can see you see whether you have a secondary porosity, not because of the reason because it's weathering and such, but because you can see there is a secondary. Is there any fracture? What's the fracture looks like? What's spacing? You can understand. So if it's outcropping, so it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean,
now
like
I think the problem is that whether you can, if you have your reservoir outcropping, now the question is, do you see any thermal manifestation indicating that oh yeah, that reservoir or the carbonates that is the reservoir rocks that, and then you try to map it out in the so that's something that I don't know. But to have an analog, I think we in here in Indonesia, the way we try to understand is also to go field work and then try to see a kind of fracture basement or fractures in the surface, and try to understand how does it look like, and apply our knowledge to characterize the reservoir.
So basically the conceptual model still needs volcanics to be illustrated, or there's no things the other type of conceptual
No,
model.
I'm not saying that. So this is this is a particularly a volcanic archetype.
Okay.
There are several settings, right? But since I don't have any experience in the basin type, so I'm inviting audience who have an experience, whether you're seeing the same phenomena of thermal manifestations, or you're seeing differently, or how does it look like. So to be honest, it doesn't always have to imply that you have a reheat, because in basinal type, as soon as you can, if you reach the certain depth, then you'll have, let's say if you have 3 degree per 30 meters, so meaning that that would equivalent like 30 degree per 1 kilometers, right? So if you want to go, it's supposed to be higher than the normal geothermal gradient in order for you to reach 160 degree by 3 kilometers. So but I don't know what's the thermal manifestation looks like in Germany.
Maybe I can add on this. So in Germany, especially in the Aachen region, what they're doing right now is they are looking for a highly classified lower carboniferous layer, and they have it on the so we have outcrops where we can see it and we can see the karstificated areas, but since I don't know, but since the 60s or 70s there has been no real geophysical analysis or drillings in Germany. There was just nothing. So what they are basically doing right now is guessing where this layer are in the depth based on the dipping and stuff like that. And they also don't know if there is hot water down there. So they are suggesting, because there should be in theory. But this is what we're doing right now in Germany, and we have it in the Aachen region. We have some hotter region in the lower Rhine ground, but we don't have these temperatures you have in Indonesia. So we are nowhere near, at least in Aachen, in the Aachen region, to get energy, electric energy from it. So we can be lucky if we can heat our house with that. And in Germany, we're doing stuff that you have done the last 30 years. So we're just starting the exploration right now. It's pretty basic what we are doing. But maybe there's sorry, it's not so interesting for you maybe, but there should be a presentation about that in the upcoming month, probably, that we're talking about the geothermal potential in this region where we are located right now. So
Sure, it will be interesting. Is it going to be online, or are you guys going to come to the IIGCE?
I think it's. I'm not quite sure, but I think it's online. I think we do it all online.
All right. Okay. Looking forward to it.
But we will inform about the about the topic and the speaker and the date on LinkedIn and all the platforms that are.
Sure. Okay.
But there, at least there are several manifestations in Aachen.
So it's another good thing, it's a good indication.
That's a good indication.
There is some hot water, but but where exactly, no one's quite sure.
But we don't know. We don't know whether it's from the shallow groundwater or it's directly from the deep source.
Yeah, sure. Another thing is to utilize the if you have geophysics. I think everyone knows, if you can run some geophysics, just at least to try to see an anomaly. But it's if you given that that there is how do I say it, in the geological settings. I need to look at the geological setting in Germany, whether you have any convergent plate boundaries there, or at least a divergence like in Africa. So generating new heats or indications of that, and we can utilize that as well as an indications.
So we have some rift structures or starting rift structures in the lower Rhine Valley, but it's not like in Africa where you have this still ongoing rifting. It's basically just stopped. But usually about everywhere else we just have boring sediments everywhere. So unfortunately, no volcanoes there.
Okay. So okay. Thank you very much.
So maybe we already have a lot of discussion. Okay, maybe we can wrap it now. So thank you very much on behalf of SPE Student Chapter RWTH Aachen, Mr. Marino. We would like to say thank you to our speaker, Mr. Marino Baruch, for the fruitful materials that have been presented, and also to all participants that already actively participate in our discussion today. Well, we hope that this short session can provide you with new insight about well logging application in the geothermal industry. So before closing this webinar, I would like to invite all participants also to check our new website. So I can put our new website in the chat box. So I can share my screen maybe. So okay. So for you, for the all participants, this is our new website. You can see any information about our student chapter from the our vision mission, and then also our upcoming and previous events. So you can also find several past webinars, and then you can also the recording from the YouTube link. So check it out directly for our speaachen.org. Okay, hopefully you can get insight from this webinar. Once again, thank you very much. See you in our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Interesting session.
Sure. Hopefully we will meet you again, yeah, Yusuf?
Yeah, it's the visa thing, sincerely, I'm about to give up, I must confess. I'm not sure I'll be applying for next summer semester. It's supposed to close by the 31st of this month, right? I keep on applying. I'm giving the admission. I've been given 6 times now, to be candid.
Okay.
But the visa has been total chaos. I don't know.
Okay, sure.
I applied for appointments in July last year. No appointment date given yet.
Yeah, it's always.
Welcome to German bureaucracy.
That's the absolute reality. I think that's the right way to put it. German bureaucracy. It's crazy. I don't know. And with this webinar, I'm kind of having a change of heart. Maybe I should try one more time and just apply fully. I'll be giving admission again. Maybe a miracle will happen this time around. I don't know.
Sure.
I'm tired. But to be candid, it's like first love. It's like love at first sight. Once I landed on the website, the